2 days from, the first anniversary of the 2017 general election. It was no doubt a very controversial one, from the nullification of the presidential election to a very publicly divided electoral body. And the question, as Murimi posed in his story this far, is that many really can't answer the question of what went wrong with the presidential election on August 8th. As an election observation body, can you help us answer that question?
Well, we are not the election observation body, and thank you for having me. Group, yes. Yeah. Many things, of course, went wrong. We know that many things went wrong from that elections. Let me start by saying that I think one of the things that must always be the cornerstone of electoral processes is a word called trust. And we start by the people going through a process in which they want to elect leaders who should represent their interests. So they want to trust, they want to have a system through which they can be able to come up with a new government or a new leadership, so they can be able to articulate the issues of the people. So they trust that through that process they shall be able to get to the people that they want and the government that they want. Now, if you move that trust a little bit further to other stakeholders, because these people trust their leadership who campaign so they can be elected. They go through political parties which must be trusted so that they can be able to also generate systems that allow the best of the choices to come through. They go to an election management body which must also organize national elections in a manner that can be trusted. And therefore, afterwards, people are able to realize, or are supposed to be able to, at the end of this system, they're supposed to be getting the leaders that they so desire. Right. Now, if you move from that point in terms of trust, then very many things went wrong in terms of these elections, not least what Murimi has talked about in terms of the nullification of the presidential elections. But even way before that, that we expect that if the process is going to be a trusted process to instill public confidence so that people can be able to believe in it, then it needs to be transparent, it needs to be accountable, and it need to be simple so that people understand these processes. So all the way from the preparation period. ELOG has talked, for instance, about we started changing, a number of stakeholders are not happy with the commission that was in place before. And agitations to change the commission, in our view, came very late in the day. So we had new commissioners coming in a process.
They had very strict timelines to work with.
To work with. And they had to hurry a number of things, even before they understood. The CEO of the Secretariat, the Chief Election Officer, was not very old also. He had also come midstream. And then you have to, all these things that need to be prepared in terms of an electronic process, political party nomination processes, ensuring that the campaign period and the voter education processes and registration processes went on as scheduled. So we had an election, we went into an election on August 8th when there were too many issues which had not been handled. And therefore, by the time we were coming to that election, we could have raised enough issues. In fact,
the trust issue also then at that time was, not so much trust in the process.
And one of the things that we even say, if the Supreme Court, for instance, was to discuss a case on whether we were prepared or whether there were any violations, even before that election, we think that election could even have been nullified before. Because if you look at the political party nominations, if you look at the procurement processes, if you look at the voter registration processes, there were enough things that could have been taken to court and stopped the election. Even then, remember, the Supreme Court is the one which advised Kenyans that elections were a process and not an event. So we're not just looking at August 8th. Or October the 26th. We're looking at the entire process. Were there moments or instances that this could have been, nullified or stopped? I think so. So moving on, of course, we went on and held the elections. I totally agree with Omola Otiende that everything on elections day, even from an observer point of view, everything went well. Were the polling stations open? Did they conduct the vote according to the rules of engagement? Did voters make lines? Did we count properly? Did we get the results properly? Everything went on well. But after that, where we have the transmission process, where we have to discuss issues about the electronic part of the electronic process, the relaying of these results, we had major problems. And as a result, the Supreme Court intervened and nullified that particular election.
Right.
So there are many issues that we can be able to talk about in terms of the elections.
And the transmission, of course, stands out as one of the critical, points of discord in how this happened. And there was that legal process to try and see exactly what happened. To date, many would question why IEBC refused to have their servers open to be scrutinized. Do you think that this will forever then cast a shadow on the credibility of how all this happened?
One of the fears of, from an electoral balance point of view, one of the fears of having electronic processes in elections, and why people are always very, have misgivings about having and employing electronic systems, is that they're always black boxes. I mean, we're talking about a country, we're not at the age where every villager in Turkana and every villager in Mandera, they understand an electronic process. They're always black boxes, even for some of the people who are very, very aware of these processes. So if you were to employ a system or an electronic process, then we have to go with the Article 88 of the Constitution, which talks about an election process which is supposed to be simple, verifiable, accurate. You want as simple as a system as possible.
Right.
Something which is clear to everybody. The minute you come up with complicated processes where you're telling us that we don't, for this reason or the other reasons, the servers cannot be opened, or we cannot be able to see in the process when there is a verification process which is supposed to be undertaken, then that becomes very complicated. And if it becomes complicated, then it's not simple. Then you already violated the constitutional provisions, which say that we need to have a system which is simple, which is easily verifiable.
Right.
So for whatever reasons, it could be the vendors who are saying, we have to go through these protocols. It could be getting those logs. It's a complicated process itself. We don't need to know. We don't need to care. This is supposed to be Wanjiko in the village, just understanding how can I protect my vote all the way to the end and get my desired result.
Right.
And it should be very clear. So if Wanjiko wants to understand how that process was followed, it should not be very complicated. And therefore, that becomes a big debate that IEBC will have to deal with even moving forward, that we have to employ a system and a process that is quite easily understandable and verifiable by any stakeholder in the elections.
Right. And then how can we do that? Because we had issues with systems, network in 2013. It was a problem we had then, technology, by and large. And it's the same problem we had in 2017. Is this a problem merely of, products, services, or is it a problem of will?
I think it's a problem of preparedness.
Right.
Who doesn't understand M-Pesa processes? They are electronic processes, isn't it? But there's a way that Kenyans have been able to internalize the M-Pesa system. You can go to the villages and they will be able to do a transaction through the mobile phone or mobile telephony in a broader sense.
Right.
So it's a question of how IEBC prepares the stakeholders to understand an electronic process. There are countries in the world where they have a full-blown, ours is a partial electronic process and a manual process.
Right.
Because we still count. We don't press buttons. We still actually fill a ballot paper.
Yes.
We don't press a button. So it is still a partial electronic process. You must understand that.
Right.
But that partial process must be seen to be very simple, must become very simple to understand. And I think we have made recommendations before saying that electronic processes need to be procured quite early in advance. As we do voter education, as we do the other process of ensuring that the masses understand the processes, we should be able to explain to them how is this process going to work. And all the stakeholders, whether it's the political parties, whether even the judiciary and observers and all other actors around the elections, need to understand these processes. But most of this procurement is done very late in the day. We do not know the terms of engagement between, there's something called vendor locking. For instance, I think one of the later studies which has been done by the Keta Center, I think the Keta Center will be releasing a report soon on the electronic process. And one of the things, indications which is coming from that report was that there's what we call vendor locking in elections. That the agreement between perhaps IEBC and OT Morpho is such that this has to be done, before this happens, we must do this. So it's a contractual engagement. Now, it is important for all of us to be privy, including the media, to those engagements. This is a public process.
Right.
What kind of engagements do we have which would stop IEBC from making a move here because the vendor has put some stipulations that this cannot be able to happen. So these are things which need to be in the public domain. It's a public process. It is supposed to be an accountable and transparent process. So we need to ensure that if there's going to be any kind of agreement from the procurement itself, who is coming in, who are these actors, who are these vendors, and then we get about their history, we get to know about the kind of contract that we are entering ourselves into, then we cannot be able to manage it better.
Right.
And if the media is in the know, and other stakeholders, the political players are also in the know, the observers are in the know, it becomes, again, we go back to the issue of trust. Right. It becomes easier to trust that this process is going to be open.
Because there's engagement every step of the way.
Every step of the way.
Right. And the electoral body in Kenya really has, over time, been one that is really facing a lot of troubles. And this latest one, IEBC, we saw the tribulations they had in internal wrangles and all that. First of all, before we get into what really troubles this body perennially, does the credibility of the electoral process in Kenya lie squarely on IEBC?
I don't think it lies squarely on IEBC. But IEBC is central to the elections. It's the main actor in these elections. And anything going wrong with the actor, with the main actor, then of course it's going to spill over. There are, of course, political parties are major players. The judiciary is a major player. The government is a major player. Media is a major player. And the voter is the most important player of all in that equation. But in terms of them playing a central role, I mean, it's a critical role what they play. And that's the reason why, and I go back to the question of trust. One of the reasons why there are a number of models across the world of the election management body. Right. We chose an independent model because there could be, in the Western world, by the way, and I try to say this as many times as I can, in the Western world, most of the election management bodies reside in ministries or government departments. They run elections. Right. But the major reason why they do that is because they are trusted. We trust that ministry to be able to conduct itself in a professional way, in an objective way. Right. The reason why most of sub-Saharan Africa and most of the third world opts for independent models because we don't trust the government to do a good job. We don't trust Parliament to come up with something. We don't trust the judiciary. We don't trust this. We want another independent model where we can make contributions towards who is going to be in it, and it is directly responsible in the undertaking of the elections and answerable to the public directly. So you want a model which then creates an aspect of independence. It is not tied to the government, it's not tied to the political party. So we feel more comfortable with such a process. So in Kenya, we do have an independent model, which again, we have to make a decision about how do we choose it. Do we choose it one which is full of experts? Do we choose one which has political actors? You know, because you can also mix them. You can also say, let all political parties make a contribution of who they want in the commission. They can all feel they are represented inside it. But you can also say, let's go for an expert model. Well, you get people who are more knowledgeable on election processes, on electoral processes, who can run and manage a commission. Right. So there are discussions about what kind of model, what kind of structure that can be able to put in place moving forward. And the reason I asked that, whether we can say that credibility lies squarely with IEBC, is because we saw them saying over and again that there was a lot of interference, political interference, especially with their work, and then bringing to question whether it's really fair to say that they were able to conduct their work in the best environment ever, that they could have, Well, first, elections is a political process, and in a country like ours, I think for the last nearly 20 years, our elections have been very protracted and very high what do you call it? High voltage. High voltage elections. Yeah. So anybody who is coming to work in the commission must be aware of that. That's number one. Number two is that, as I said earlier, we recruited a commission. We replaced a commission too late in the day. Best practices across the world, you don't replace your commission even 2 years to an election because there are too many things to learn. We took out an entire commission Some of the commissioners in the former commission were very good guys, very experienced people, but we decided we don't trust any of them. Let's put in a new commission. After a long engagement, they assumed office in the year of the election. In the year of the election, hardly, I think, 8 months to the election, they're coming into play. They're also coming into play with the commission, with the head of the secretariat, which was also relatively new. I think Chiloba had not done 2 years by that time. So you're looking at an entire new outfit trying to run high voltage elections. So if you think about that environment, then you couldn't have said it would have been a conducive environment to conduct elections.
And maybe my last question before we wind up our conversation. We saw what happened the March 9th handshake. And some have said, betrayed by the opposition, said you are spearheading our interest in this, and what they were really calling the fight for electoral justice. Do you agree, or what is your thought about that? That you feel the fight for electoral justice died with the handshake?
No, I think the handshake has created a sideshow, if I would call it that, a sideshow which takes away from the focus on what actually ought to be done. In the last election, I mean, it was a historic election in the fact that we had the presidential elections was nullified. We had to go for a second election. That second election was boycotted by quite a number of actors, which created legitimacy questions on the government, which was elected after 26th of October. So there are bound to be enough questions on that elections that must. First thing, for me, I think one of the critical things which must be spoken about, and I hope you're going to be discussing it through, is the issue of justice to the people who died. We lost very many people in that election. What has happened to that issue? The entire question of electoral justice is not just about that period after the election, but the compliance with the laws, the what gets to be seen after in terms of the outcomes of the election process. So how we organize our institutions, our laws, our legal framework to ensure that the will of the people is protected until the end is an electoral justice issue, which I think the handshake is not, as we speak right now, not handling. And I think moving forward, what we need to do, we need to see stakeholders coming quickly together and proposing the reform agenda, or consolidating the reform agenda. ELOG, we have done that with a number of civil societies. We already have consolidated our agenda. The IEBC is doing an evaluation of its own processes. Our hope was that we could even undertake an independent audit and evaluation of last year's election. Then the recommendations that would come from there forms the reform agenda moving forward, and then we can try to address this as quickly as possible. So many lessons to learn from that, and of course a lot still needs to be discussed to inform the way forward. And thank you so much for joining us in studio this morning. Mule Musau, who is the National Coordinator at the Elections Observations Group, talking about the lessons learned and critical issues that need to be addressed after the general election. And earlier on, we talked to you about that developing story happening at the Kenyatta National Hospital, where a section of the staff are on strike and currently demonstrating around there, and we shall be having live pictures from that end just to hear out what are the issues that the staff are airing out that is informing the strike.
Lakini kwa sababu tusikizaneni, kwa sababu wako hapa na kwa sababu hao ndio wanalipanga sisi mshahara, hata kama tuko na paonya pamoja, si ndio? Tutawapatia dakika moja. Tukisikia vile wanataka, ai together nao. Sisi tunataka pesa. Na mwingine daktari amekuja na pesa. Atuambie hapa kwa hapa. Kwa hivyo solidarity together. Pesa papo. Kwa dakika mbili naita daktari akuja atuambie amekuja kufanya nini hapa. Thank you.